Okay, buenas tardes, everyone. Good night, good evening. My name is Ben Gutierrez. I am one of the admissions officers with Johns Hopkins University, located in Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm excited to be with you all today to talk a little bit about the highly selective admissions process in the United States, applying to universities with a highly selective admissions process, and just giving some tips on how to apply, what we are looking for, and then also talking a little bit about, in particular, the essays. The essays are an essential part of the application, as I'll talk about, because they really help us better understand the personality of the student, so that you're not just a few words on a piece of paper, but it gives students really an opportunity to really kind of express themselves in their application, which is so very important to us. A little bit more about myself just before we get started. I am the primary admissions counselor representative resource for students across Latin America and Mexico in particular. So I am your point of contact. If any of you all have any questions whatsoever, you can email me. I will pull up my slide in a little bit, or my set of slides, but my email will be on there. So if you want, you can send me an email following this, during this presentation even, and then at the end of this presentation, I will also be taking questions about all of the content that we've talked about in this session today. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started with the presentation. And so I will pull up my presentation now. So hopefully you all can see here. So again, my name is Benjamin Gutierrez, and I'm here to talk about highly selective admissions in the US. And you will see that says Johns Hopkins because that is where I work. So just to get started, let's see here. So the first thing to keep in mind when you're applying to a highly selective institution is this idea of the holistic admissions process. So here in the United States, we are not just looking at your testing, your scores. We are not just looking at your grades on your transcript, how you have done at your high school. Those are very important to us, and I will talk a little bit about how they are important and what we are looking at in particular. We are also looking at the qualitative pieces of the application. So we are looking at things like the counselor letter, or a letter from your high school administrator, whoever that might be, talking about you as a person. We're also looking at the letters that your teachers write to us, and you have full autonomy to select, the teachers that you want to write letters on your behalf. And then we also get information from your school that is available that gives us a little bit of information of what has been offered at your school, what kind of curriculum there is. And so as you can see, there are a lot of different aspects to the application. A lot of these are personal, the essays at the bottom, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But then there are also the quantitative, the numerical pieces that we're looking at. And so just going down this list, first and foremost, the application form. So at most of our institutions, we will accept the common application. That is the most common, if you will. But some other institutions have their own applications that they create as an institution. Some will accept applications such as the Universal College application or the Coalition application. Those are just different forms of applications. They all ask for the same pieces that are the following bullets. But again, the most common of which is the common application. The transcripts are very important because we want to see that you are doing well in the classroom at your school. And so we work on our end to understand the curriculum at your school, whether you're on a 0 to 10 scale or a 0 to 100 scale, if your schools only offer A, B, C, or D, or if they have different grading scales. That is another thing that we're going to be looking at. And really, we just want to see that students are maintaining top grades throughout their time in their secondary high school career. So the transcript we're always looking at them within the context of your school. And so that is always something that we on our end as admissions counselors, we work to know. We get in contact with organizations like Education USA if we ever have any questions, or even folks at your high schools who can give us more information about what a strong student looks like in that. And that's one of the documents that we require. The second thing that we're looking at, another quantitative piece, is the testing. So we will accept either the SAT or the ACT, as many other institutions will. And really, this is a piece that we're going to be looking at. And we do, as all of our institutions do, have what we call middle 50% testing averages that we give to students to kind of identify what they should be shooting for. But it's not maybe like some other systems and types of university admissions processes out there, in that if you get below a certain grade, that's not going to be automatically discounting you from admission to our institutions. If you get below the range that we provide at Johns Hopkins, let's say, for example, that doesn't automatically discount you from being admitted to the institution. So we really are looking at more than just the testing, but this is just one quantitative piece along with the transcripts that we do look at. And then now I'm going to start getting into kind of the more personal aspects of the application. So things that can really impact a decision to admit a student at our schools. A lot of students are getting strong marks in their transcripts, strong scores on their testing, but really the things that are getting them admitted are things first, like the counselor letter and the school profile. So again, the school information that helps us put everything into context, and then that high school administrator or counselor, or in some cases an Education USA advisor, who can provide us with more information about the student, more information about not just how they've performed at the school, but also what a student is doing outside of it, what a student is doing in terms of getting involved in extracurriculars, in athletic teams, in science competitions. Those are all things that are important outside of just the grades and the scores. The teacher letters are also very important. The teacher letters will give us a little bit more of an idea of the academic character of a student. So ultimately, if a student is asking a lot of questions in class, if a student is contributing and working well with others in a lab setting, things like that can really come through in the teacher letters that can give us, again, a better sense of the student's personality. It can color the application, and that is another really essential part of the application. Another piece that isn't on here because it's not quite it's not a piece that you need to submit necessarily, but it's within the main application. The other thing that we're taking into account in the holistic approach, that kind of well-rounded approach to viewing a student, is the extracurricular activities. So like I said, are you involved at your school? Are you involved in the community? That can really make a difference in the application. You know, even a student who is maybe not the best when it comes to testing, but if you are a student that exhibits that you are a high impact student in your community, you are starting an organization, you are running nonprofits, you are, you know, organizing fundraisers, those are all things that can really kind of elevate an application. Essays, we will talk a little bit more about those in a little bit, so I won't talk too much about those. But then the last piece, the interview, and even other components. The interview is something that some universities, particularly highly selective institutions, require. The interview is not something that we at Hopkins require, but some other schools might. This is a great question to ask because it may be that some institutions want either a admissions counselor or an alumnus to talk to and meet the student. And again, that's just to get a better sense of the student's personality, how they carry conversation, learning a little bit more, and again, coloring that application, making it more than just a few words on a piece of paper. So some universities require those, some they're optional. At Hopkins, they are not required or optional. We really give it just the rest of the application kind of tells us what we want to know in the process. But that's a great question to ask schools. So we're going to be moving on to talk about the role of the essays. So this is something that is so very important to us because, again, as some of these bullets entail, this gives us more of a sense of a student's personality, their writing style. That is one component, but it's ultimately giving students the opportunity to tell us a story about something that has been really important in their life. It gives students the opportunity to complement something that's already been mentioned elsewhere in the application. So if in your extracurriculars activities list, you note that you're, passionate about or very involved in theater, or drama at your school, you can really use your essay to kind of build on that in a way that is not repetitive necessarily, but really giving us a sense of what was your experience, what was a specific moment that you really latched onto, and ultimately, how is that going to make you a better contributor on our campus? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? Those are the things that can come through in the essays that we don't necessarily see in other parts of the application, like the test scores and the grades. So that's what we really want to see with the essays, and it really gives students an opportunity to kind of put that forward. In kind of the highly selective admissions sphere, there are various types of essays that you can come in contact with, and don't worry, I'll give you all a few examples, and that'll be kind of the bulk of the presentation, kind of looking at examples of what these are like. So the first that we will talk about is the personal statement. So this is the statement, this is the essay that you would have to write when you fill out the Common Application or any other application platform. With these application platforms, this is an essay, the personal statement, that will go to every institution that you apply to. These are application platforms that are accepted by various institutions, and so if you fill out one, you can send it to many. And the personal statement is the thing that will go out to those institutions. This is, as it sounds, it is a way for you to talk a little bit about your personality, those things that I mentioned earlier, the hobbies, those activities that kind of get you going, that things that you're interested in. Maybe it's a story about a family member. We'll see an example of one of those later. But this is, again, one that should not be university specific. You should not say, and this is why I want to apply to X university, because, again, it's going to every university that you apply to, and you don't want to let Y university know that you are applying to X university. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it leads to a little bit of an awkward situation. So that one, just make sure it's not university specific. The supplemental essay is another piece, another type of essays that some universities will require as well. This is an essay on top of the one on the main application that you have to complete for the university in question. And there are two types. The first is the supplemental essay focusing on the university. So this is kind of that classic essay, supplemental essay that you might see. Why, X university? Why do you want to go to this university in particular? And it'll often be a why blank essay. And we'll talk about what that might look like. And then the second supplemental essay type is the intellectual exercise. And so the intellectual exercise, rather than just asking, why X university, the intellectual exercise actually poses a question. A good example of one of these is what you'll run into if any of you all have listened to a presentation or have thought of applying to University of Chicago. They are actually a great example because they do have an intellectual exercise as one of their supplemental essays. Questions like find X and where is Waldo really? Things like that, where it's very open-ended, but really ultimately they're trying to get a sense of how you think. So rather than just simply answering the question, thinking creatively about it in a way that can really explain your thought process and ultimately let a university know it's not so much about getting the right answer, it's more about kind of following and leading the reader on in your thought process. And so those are the different types. Now, for the personal statement, before I move on to the next one, we're going to be seeing some examples of these, and I will pick out some of the strengths and then also some of the weaknesses of these essays. And typically when I do this in person, it's a little more of an interactive exercise, but for the sake of this virtual webinar setting, I will just kind of go through, kind of give a summary of what the writing is about so you don't have to read it all, but then talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses. And again, these first examples are for the personal statement, again, that general essay that you send to every institution. So this is the first one. So this is an example of a student who is writing about her grandmother, writing about how she came from Portugal. She worked and lived in many places. I think this student does a great job of infusing a lot of character. You'll see some exclamation points. You'll see some italics, some quotes. And so this is a student that is creating an environment and telling a story, which is exactly what we want to see in the essays. And the writing style, again, which is ultimately also something we want to see, is great here. Great grammar, well written. But this one in particular, reading through it, she's talking mostly about her grandmother. And ultimately, harkening back to something I mentioned earlier, the personal statement is exactly as it sounds. It should be about the student and the student first and foremost. So one of the questions I know that they ask on the Common Application is, talk about someone that you look up to who has influenced you. And so this student likely answered that question. However, they didn't spend enough time talking about themselves, and this essay ends up being more of a biography of the grandmother. So when answering those questions, be careful that you don't leave out too much of yourself. We are getting a good perspective and an image of what her grandmother is like, but the reflection at the end, really providing that context as to how this experience, this grandmother, helped that student in question kind of develop their worldview, develop passions, develop curiosity in certain academic areas. That is a little bit lacking. And so when writing an essay, keep in mind that it is a personal essay, and at the end of the day, it should always come back to you. So that's essay number one. Again, well written, good example, but a little bit missing the mark. This next one, we'll skip to 3 and then do number 2. 3, again, I'll spare you having to read all of this. This is an example of an essay where this student is talking about themselves. This student is basically saying, first paragraph, giving a summary of a time that they worked at a summer internship at a hospital. Really cool experience, I would imagine. They talk about working with patients, and then at the end, they kind of talk a little bit about why they wanted to become a doctor. Lifelong career of becoming a doctor, I must first learn all the basics as a biology major and become a well-rounded individual to mold myself into an outstanding healthcare provider. Now, when I do this again in person, sometimes students kind of read this, and again, it's well written, but something that a lot of students observe is that it's not as personal. You'll see a lot here of kind of a summary of an example of working at a hospital, but you don't see here enough of a student really kind of explaining, those specific moments that made that experience unique to them. They are certainly talking about how this experience made them into a student who wants to study medicine, but it is, again, a little bit softer in that it is not quite pulling away the most personal aspects of the student. Comparing it to that first essay, again, the one that we just saw, this student gives a little bit of an example of what made their upbringing so unique. Their grandmother, and that cultural background that they bring into their lives, that is something that can be very unique to that student. This is actually an essay that we see very, very often. It's kind of summarizing an experience which we've already maybe seen in the extracurricular activity list that the student provides. So earlier in the application, they may have said that they worked at a summer internship. This is just kind of restating that and then saying, this is why I want to become a doctor. A way that this essay could have been stronger is maybe talking about a childhood moment that is very unique to that student, that kind of led them to want to become a physician, It may have been, a funny moment going to their pediatrician's office, or it may have been connecting the dots, connecting concepts in their specific biology class. That would be a little bit more personal. This is a little bit more of a generic essay of a student wanting to study medicine at our university. So that's another example. And then this last one, again, this is a long essay, and I don't expect you to read all of it. But this is an essay that actually really does a good job. I would say of the three, this is the strongest of them. And to just kind of give you a summary, this is a student that is working at a bakery and cafe in her neighborhood. In the second paragraph, she talks about having to tie boxes for the pastries to sit in. So she's working in the store tying boxes, and then kind of goes into a really funny example of, for whatever reason, not being able to tie the string correctly. No matter how much she tried, she just couldn't do it that perfect way. And then what I think is really important to note here is that in the fourth essay, the fourth paragraph, she draws a comparison. She brings the comparison in of string theory. So she connects, the idea of a string that she ties for her job, and then string theory and her passions for physics. And then does just a really good job of connecting two very seemingly different moments and concepts, and making it into an essay that is very unique to her. Again, it's very well written, but not many students out there are going to write about a really funny experience, personal experience like this specific one that the student is writing about, tying cake boxes and then comparing that to some of her passions in academic areas like physics. And so, as you see here, it's not so much the gravity of what you write about. It's not so much the actual content and the moment. You don't have to have saved the world. You don't have to have experienced a traumatic life event. This is as simple as just working in a pastry shop, tying strings, and then connecting it to some academic area that they are really interested in. The personal statement is and can be just that simple. It can be about those little things, those little moments, those little hobbies. And by building those out a little bit more, and I think this student does a good job of doing that. That's a good example of how you can really turn a good essay into a great one, particularly for the personal statement. So that was a little bit about the personal statement. If any of you all have any questions about what those might look like, we on our website at Hopkins actually have a great resource called Essays That Worked. You can just Google it, look it up on your browser, Essays That Worked, and it has a compilation of really, really strong essays of students who have been admitted in the past, and then notes from admissions counselors talking about why those personal statements were so strong. So if you have time, you can go check that out. That is a great resource for students. So now moving into the second type of essay. So there's the supplemental essay, the university essay. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two types of these. The first one is the YX University. So this is an opportunity for you to make an explicit case. And I would always recommend that students be specific and evidence-based. Do your research, I think, is the biggest thing to keep in mind here. And really find those things that you can't just find easily on a Wikipedia page. So if you go on Wikipedia and you see that X university is situated on this lake and is close to this city, and if you just say things as high level and generic as that, you aren't really making a case for why that institution in particular fits your needs and your interests. So really, really go in. Websites are a great place to learn about universities. Go into their academic pages, learn about their majors and minors, learn about the extracurriculars that you can get involved in, whether it's a cappella groups, whether it's theater groups. It doesn't have to be academic. If someone for Johns Hopkins, we have a different supplemental essay, but if we had a why Johns Hopkins essay, a really fun essay that we would like to see would be, I really would be interested in going to your university because I have been a fan of your a cappella group for a while, or I really am interested in this community service project that you have working with this specific organization in the city. Just do your research, go on websites, talk to admissions people, talk to students of that institution, institution and just build your knowledge about a school so that you can write the most informed university essay. And the last piece of advice for this one is, I think, a really good one that you should use for any of your supplemental essays that focus on a university. And it's called the whiteout test. If you were to take, let's say you write an essay for X university, and you write in that essay, I want to go to this university, and then at the end, that is why I want to go to this university. If you take out the name, if you white out the name of the university, and if you reread that essay, could that essay be mistaken for another university? So is your essay strong enough and specific enough to where if that name of the university is taken out, would we still get a sense of that school and really get a good sense that you have done your research about that school? So the whiteout test, if you block out the name, it should still hold firm. And so that would make a strong university essay. The second type, as I talked about earlier, is the intellectual exercise. This is another opportunity, like I said, to reveal your personality and your thought process. So again, it's not so much the end product, but it is the way of getting there that is most important. And here, authenticity is crucial. Again, it's not about being correct. It's about writing something that you enjoy. Oftentimes these universities that offer these or request these will have a number of options for prompts. And so pick the one that you feel like is most interesting to you. Write about something don't try to write about something or try to impress somebody with knowledge in an area that is not your forte. If you are a student that is passionate about history, even if that question is find X, which sounds very much like a math and science type question, X could very much be an X, find Xerxes in, old Persian text, X for Xerxes, and then maybe spin it that way. So authenticity is crucial, and oftentimes these essays are really fun to write if you choose topics that are most interesting to you particularly. And then lastly, be sure to answer the prompts. So here, it's easy to kind of go off in your own way with your thoughts, but if the question is asking for something specific, make sure that at the end you are answering that question. And then that is kind of the biggest thing to kind of keep in mind with essays as you go forward. It's easy to be creative, being creative can kind of take you in a lot of different directions, but make sure at the end of the day you are answering the prompt directly. So again, the university essay and then the intellectual exercise, two types of supplemental essays. Not every university requests them, but if they do, feel free to ask those admissions counselors questions to learn more. At Hopkins in particular, this is an example of one, just to use one that is close to one that we see very often. We kind of have a hybrid of the two. So it's a little bit of the university, a little bit of the intellectual exercise. So successful students at Hopkins make the biggest impact by collaborating with others, including peers, mentors, and professors. Talk about a time in or out of the classroom when you worked with others and what you learned from that experience. So first, you should be asking yourself with any essay, why are we asking this question? So again, it's the intellectual exercise kind of paired with the university, the why university. So we want to understand the thought process. Here, we are asking this because on our campus, collaboration is valued. If you can go into a laboratory, if you can go into a classroom, if you can go into an extracurricular setting, we want to know that you're going to be a student that is not just going to do the work, but is also going to work with others to create wonderful things, to discover wonderful things, because that is at the heart of what we believe and a part of our mission. So why are we asking this? Because ultimately we want to know if you'll bring that quality to the table. And then ultimately also thinking about what exactly we are asking. What is collaboration? Collaboration is working with others. Collaboration is not leadership. A pitfall that we see is students, again, not reading the prompt. We are asking very specifically about collaboration, not leadership. And students oftentimes, they just kind of forget that we ask about collaboration and they answer by talking about, and that's when I knew that I could be a leader, or that's when I took charge of my group and finished the project. That is not the goal. We want to understand times when you found out one of your weaknesses and you used other people's strengths around you to really help yourself grow and help a project move forward. That is kind of the base idea of collaboration. And so again, always keeping in mind what the question is asking. And then one last piece before I move into some examples is supplemental essays can also be a great way for you to learn about an institution. If you do not like collaborating, or if you like working on your own and that's the only way you want to work, then by reading this essay and knowing that that's a core value of our institution, reading any supplemental essay, you're getting a sense of what they value. And if you are having difficulty, or if you don't really have any examples of collaborating, maybe that institution isn't the right place for you. So essays can be a good resource in that way as well. So these are two examples. Again, I won't have you read all through them, but this is a student, again, kind of who falls into that pitfall that I mentioned earlier. You'll see it in the second paragraph that throughout the project, I learned just how rewarding collaboration can be. Although I wasn't quite sure how well my partner was going to do, I found that by clearly outlining everything she needed to do and giving her explicit instructions on how to complete the lab right away, it all worked out perfectly. And then the kicker at the end, it's important to step up and be a leader. So again, misses the mark a little bit there, starts by talking about collaboration, and then doesn't really offer strong reflections in the end. Again, answering the prompt with any essay, no matter what the question, making sure you're answering the prompt. This is an example of a good essay. Again, long essay, but I will just kind of highlight the really key part of this. When working in a group, second paragraph towards the middle, everyone has various roles and responsibilities. There is no one person responsible for everything. While we struggled initially to effectively share our goals and visions with one another, after a few days, we got into the rhythm and everything flowed quite smoothly. You'll notice that this student does a little more of talking about the group and talking about the weaknesses and talking about working with each other than the first student, who kind of missed the mark and just ended up talking about something completely different. So again, we get a lot from this. We learn a little bit about the student's interests. It's not, again, so much about what the student is talking about. You can talk about, being in a classroom and working on a project. You don't have to be talking about working with a team on a project to save the world. This is just, we want to understand, are you understanding the question? And what is one example of how you've worked well with others? So kind of wrapping it all up, the effective essays in our process, the most effective ones, are ones that kind of give us a better understanding of a student's voice. And so the more that you talk about things that you are passionate about, not only will it make your essays easier to write, but it'll offer you the opportunity to infuse more of your voice. I have read strong essays about students and their interesting choices, their interests in certain musical groups. One student that I read last year talked about her obsession with K-pop, Korean pop. This was a student that ultimately kind of talked about how she grew up with this borderline obsession with this music genre, and then ultimately how that made her more passionate about learning music, and she eventually got into music composition. And so she did tie it into the end about what she wanted to do later on, but it's ultimately she's talking about things that she's passionate about. I read another essay of a student who was talking about their hobby when it came to beekeeping. He was a beekeeper. It was something he had done for a long time since he was a kid. His dad kind of did it as well and taught him, and it was something that this student was really interested in, and that is a great essay. It adds to something that probably hasn't been noted anywhere else in the application. The student is talking about something that they enjoy. It ultimately gives us a good sense of what makes that student different in the process. It doesn't have to be saving the world. It can be as simple as a little hobby that you have. This works in concert with other application elements. It gives us personality traits, aptitudes. Again, if you want great examples of those, you can check out the examples on our website. And then lastly, it provides the committee with an idea, and this is very, very important. So definitely take a note here. what kind of community member you will be inside and outside of the classroom. So, for us, we specifically ask about collaboration, but, are you a student who's going to get along with others? Are you a student who will maybe want to bring your hobbies to campus? Maybe we don't have that kind of group that you are very interested in and that you've been involved in, but you can bring that to our campus, and we want to see that passion and initiative, and an essay can be a really great place to make that known. So in sum, essay writing tips going forward: write in the first person. You can do that now. This isn't scientific writing. This isn't, academic writing. You can use I, you can use we, you can use those things. You can incorporate metaphors and dialogue and all of that creative writing, stuff that you've learned in some of your English courses. So utilize those. Think about who your audience is, and choose topics accordingly. This note is in particular about, you have to be careful sometimes when talking about, in particular, good examples are politics and religion. Those can be really divisive topics, but always make sure that you're approaching it from a very open-minded standpoint. So even if you disagree with certain things, make sure that you are demonstrating that you are willing to consider the other perspective. Make sure that you are civil in your discussion. You are not putting anyone else down. Understand another's perspective and make that known in your writing. And I think you can still talk about those things that are and can be controversial. It's just a matter of how you write about them that is important. So you never know who's going to be reading your essay, so just keep that in mind. One of the last points, don't feel constrained by the 5-paragraph essay format, how you've been trained to write. I've seen great essays that are written in poetry format, in prose. I have seen essays that have strayed from the opening, body, and closing paragraph format. So don't feel that that's something you have to follow. But again, grammar rules still are applied in some other ways. We want to see good spelling. We want to see good grammar overall. So don't go too crazy with that, but just know that you have a little freedom here. And then always proofread and allow time for multiple drafts. So that's a little bit about the essays. And then with the last 5 minutes, I just want to talk a little bit about the university. So I work at Johns Hopkins University, and I'll take a little bit of time just to talk about that. And then, at the end, I'll open with some questions about the essays, about the holistic admissions process, and then ultimately, if you have any questions about Hopkins as well, although you can always email me about that. So very quickly, I work for an institution, very lucky to work for an institution that is very focused on research and discovery. We are the nation's first research university, and that's something that we're probably most well known for. Some of the discoveries that we've come up with over the years and continue to come up with, even at the undergraduate level. And so that's important to know. We are located in Baltimore, Maryland, so we are just an hour north of Washington, D.C., a few hours south of Philadelphia, right on the East Coast. It's very compact on that part of the country, so you can get to so many places in just a short period of time. It's a really prime location. You're close to a lot of opportunities for internships and studies outside of the university, and that's something that makes us very unique. You'll see at the bottom here all of the institutions that are affiliated with the university. So at the graduate level, we have our School of Medicine, our School of Nursing, our School of Public Health, which has been ranked #1 since 1994 in the field of public health. And so we have plenty of students that are doing research, top-level research at the undergraduate level in these fields. The Peabody Institute as well, which is a world-renowned music conservatory, which is right down the street. The School of Advanced International Studies, which has one of the top master's programs for international studies in the world. And all of those are available. Opportunities for internships are available at those schools, even as early on as your first couple of years at Hopkins. To the right of your screen, the Homewood campus is where we are located, and that is home to our Krieger School of Arts and Science and our Whiting School of Engineering. And here are some pictures of our campus. Baltimore is one of the bigger cities in the United States, but our campus is very much it's going to feel like a quintessential college campus with all 4 seasons. It's a really beautiful place. And one thing to expect is that it's also very small when it comes to student size. So if you're an undergrad at Hopkins, you are one of only 5,300 undergraduate students. And your classes are going to be very, very small as well. Most of them being around 20 to 25 students. And that's kind of what to expect on our institution. We have 52 majors and 48 minors, the top of which are biomedical engineering is probably one of our most popular programs, international studies, public health, and also some of our pre-health biology, chemistry areas. Those are some of the strongest programs that we do have on our campus. And one of the nice things about a place like Hopkins is that we do practice the liberal arts style of education, which ultimately gives students the opportunity to study not just the field that they are majoring in, but you can also take classes outside of your specific field. So if you're an engineer, you can still take classes in creative writing. You can still take classes in history. You can still take classes in all of these areas that are outside of your specific concentration or area of study. And that is a core tenet. That flexibility and opportunity to explore is so very unique for us. And then about 97% of our students are doing some form of pre-professional experience. So again, as I mentioned earlier, number one for research, if you want to do research in a laboratory setting in our hospitals, we have students that are doing that as early on as their first year. We also have students that are doing research in the humanities fields. They are going on archaeological digs. They are working in museums. We have students also that are creating things such as prosthetics. With our School of Medicine, we have students that are doing a wide range of things. And again, the funding that we have at the institution is also large in number, to where if you do want to work on your own independent research project in a particular area, something even abroad, traveling to different countries, different parts of the world to do your research, we do have funding that is available for both domestic U.S. citizen students and also foreign nationals on our campus. So that funding is not limited to citizenship. It is open to any student who wants to really make a tangible impact, who wants to explore those academic areas at a deeper level. And then lastly, we have a very robust community on our campus. Again, it's not very big, which is really, really nice for our students. They have that small school experience when they come here. And we have a robust student population coming from overseas and abroad as well. 57 countries are represented, and I'm proud to say that we have a number of students, Mexican students who are on our campus, Mexican citizens, and also U.S. citizens who grew up and lived and then lived in Mexico, but then came back to the United States. We have a very robust community of Latin American students as a whole. And so you would certainly be around students that are similar to you, but then you would also be around students from other parts of the world and other parts of the United States as well. So very diverse, with a lot of resources as well to kind of help you stay on top of visa and immigration processes in the university and in the United States. So at this time, I'm actually going to be taking some questions. Again, that's my email address. And I will be taking some questions now and pulling up there we go. Yeah, so the first question here is, can you talk a little bit about financial aid at Johns Hopkins? And I'll actually take this screen sharing off so that you guys can see me. Hello again. So a little bit about financial aid at Hopkins. So this is an excellent question. So at Hopkins, we are an institution that promises to meet, first and foremost, 100% of a family and student's demonstrated need. That's the first thing to note. So any student, whether you are a U.S. citizen, whether you are an international student, when you are admitted to the institution, we promise to meet 100% of your need to the institution. And what I mean when I say that is there is that total sticker price that you oftentimes see on our website. It can be a very large number. It looks very large. It is a large number. But what you need to keep in mind with that number is that that is simply the amount that a student would have to pay at a university or our university. Any single expense that a student would be expected to pay, we included in that number. So that includes tuition, room and board, books, equipment, travel expenses to and from your home country, to and from home, and a number of other things, which, as you can imagine, adds up. So that is not just tuition. That is a comprehensive amount that you would have to pay in a full year. and we try to be as comprehensive as possible. So we take that number and we subtract from that what we call the expected family contribution, which when you submit documents as either a U.S. citizen or a foreign national, you submit documents that demonstrates what you can pay, and then the difference between that total number and what your family can pay, we will meet that 100% of the way. And it's worth noting that we meet that 100% of the way without any form of loans. So that money that we give you in that financial aid package is, vast majority of it is gift grant assistance, so money you do not need to pay back to the institution, and then potentially a little bit of work study as a component, which is money or work that you would have to do during the university, but again, you don't have to pay it back. And then that's how we meet that difference. The difference when it comes to applying for financial aid, when it comes to U.S. citizens versus foreign nationals, is that for U.S. citizens, we are need blind. So what need blind means is that we do not look at the finances when we are making the admissions evaluation decision. We are just looking at the students' involvement, their grades, their scores, and based on that, we admit or deny a student. And if the student is admitted, then we look at the financial aid. For international students, we do have a robust budget. It's in the millions of dollars, but it is limited. So we do have to look at the financial aid along with the admissions pieces, and that is what we call need aware. So with need aware, we have to be aware of that because, again, we don't want to get to a point where we're admitting students after we are able to fund them or after we know that we cannot fund them anymore. So it's important to know that because we meet 100% of the demonstrated need, we need to be aware of the funds to make sure that we are able to meet 100% of the demonstrated need. So in sum, if you are admitted as an international student through a need-aware process, it is slightly more selective because that budget is limited, but you can be assured that if you are admitted to the institution, no matter what your need, we will meet 100% of that difference. So that's a little bit about the financial aid. If you have any more questions about that, I'd be happy to answer those via email if you have any questions about how that works. Again, I'm answering always as a university rep from Johns Hopkins. Some other universities have different policies, so take my advice with a grain of salt. Always make sure you're asking questions. Always make sure you're reaching out to the folks at Education USA. They have more details and information on what different universities offer and things like that. One last piece about financial aid that I don't want to forget to mention is scholarships. Universities have different kinds. At Hopkins, we have them available for international and domestic students. For us, we don't have a separate application, no separate essays. You just apply and indicate that you need funds, and we will consider you, and you may get that award. Some other schools, there may be a different application process, so that's worth keeping in mind. So we have a question from John Claude. He's a student at a French program school in Mexico City. He's asking, let's see, but I don't know if the area during a French high school program define your chance of being admitted depending on the minor you want to apply. So it's actually at Hopkins, and this again is different for the type of university that you're applying to. So I think your question here is you're in a curriculum that is kind of focusing in one area and you want to apply in the scientific field. So first and foremost, we always pay attention to what has been available to you at your school. If you're coming from a school that doesn't have the most robust scientific type courses, we just want to see that you're doing the best within that curriculum that you can. We don't expect you to have gone above and beyond what is offered at your school, because that is not that is not fair to the student to say, you can only be in this program, you can only come to Hopkins if you have this course that we know your school doesn't offer. That would be very, very unfair. So we first and foremost look at what your school offers, and if there are science courses, we want to see that you're taking them and doing well in those. And if you are a student thinking of any field, make sure you're also exhibiting and explaining to us your interests about those outside of just the classes you've taken. So if you want to do engineering, if you want to do biology, if you're involved in things that are involved in those areas outside of the school or in your school, if you talk about it in your essays, that can really be a helpful piece in the application. And I think another follow-up to that question, universities also oftentimes ask you what you want to study when you're here. And for some schools, you're actually applying into a specific major. And for that, you do want to kind of ask that question, am I applying into a specific major or not? Because you want to make sure that you are expressing everything that would make you a fit for that specific major. At Hopkins, it's a little bit different. You just apply to the university as a whole. We want to see that you're a strong student as a whole, but you actually do not need to select your major from the moment you apply. You actually have a little bit of time to decide what to specifically study. And so for us, you don't have to say, you can say you want to be biology, but we will also accept undecided as a academic area of choice. So Camila asks the question, does it matter if what I'm passionate about is kind of common? And that's a great question. So common, can sometimes, I think that the best example of something, that might be common is, let's say that you are interested in soccer, football. You might be interested in that sport, and, many students out there are interested in that in the world. And so if you're talking about and writing your essay about, a specific moment, I think a good example of this would be if you're a student that's passionate about soccer, but then ends up talking about, the sport very generally. So I love how, in the games, it gets really competitive, and there was this one game in particular where we lost, and it was not a good feeling. If you leave it at just that very general level, it can be a very general and common essay. But there are students that can maybe talk about that sport in a way that is very personal to them. And so you can talk about, growing up, you were very much a fan of X specific team, and you remember that watching them on TV with your dad or your grandfather or your grandmother, and talking about specific moments. I used to watch, Cruz Azul on TV, and then you could talk about how you would usually watch them while eating breakfast with your family, and you remember moments that and now you associate football with those specific moments that make you and have been an essential part of your life. That is something that can really take a generic common essay or common interest and make it a little bit more robust and more personal. So the more you infuse those specific moments of personal family relationships, moments that you really cherish, and go into detail about those, that can be a great way to make it less common, if you will. And so one question we got is, I was wondering what kind of social extracurricular involvement the admissions department values. That's a great question as well. We actually don't have any preferences for a specific area. So we're not sitting here saying that we prefer athletics over musical groups, or service over student leadership at the high school, like student government. It really is more about the level of commitment that a student has shown to a particular area. So if you're a student that has been involved with a specific community service project for 4 years, that is something that we're going to see very strongly in our process. And so it's not so much, we don't have ones that we value more often. The thing that we value in our role is the level of commitment and the level of initiative that you've taken within that organization. So if you have been a member of let's say if you've been a member of the student government organization at your school, let's say that you're a student that implemented programs at your schools to do community service, or to you started a program to help mentor younger students at the school. If you have shown that leadership and that impact and that initiative, that to us is the most important piece. No matter what you're involved in, that is the most important. So it's not so much that we value a certain type of extracurricular more than the other. It's really we value heavier and higher involvement, not even so much across many things. It can be a certain few things, but really that higher level of involvement is something that we're looking for. And then do I need an official document to prove that I'm doing an extracurricular activity? We take your word for it. You don't need a specific document. You don't need a certificate to prove that you won an award or that you were involved in that thing, that team, that organization. You put it on your application and we take your word for it. And so that's part of the process. We believe you when you say it. We expect that students are obviously honest in the process and tell us about, but ultimately this is a time for you to really brag about yourself. It's not a time to really be humble. If you won that award, tell us about it. If you were the president or a leader of a group, if you managed a project, even if you felt like you didn't really do that, you might be a very humble person. Still let us know. This is a time for you to put your best foot forward, really shine, let your things that you've been doing shine. So certainly, you don't need to provide any context, and really, if anything, you need to be, letting us know, kind of putting that forward at the highest level. And so I'll take one more question. This will be the last question that I'll accept. Jose Manuel Gutierrez says, "Hi, nice to meet you. To graduate from high school, I did an exam with which I got my diploma. But now I can't get my transcripts because I only have a general score, the GED equivalent. That is perfectly fine. I think that this would be something that is very particular. I don't think it would it wouldn't decrease your chance of admission at all. It would, and we'd certainly work with you to make sure that we're looking at the right documents that we need to be looking at. Again, we're focused more on what you're doing at the high school level, and if that is something that happened a while ago, if there has been a gap in between when you graduated high school, or if there are any specific circumstances that make your case a little bit different, email me, email an admissions counselor. We are happy to work with you directly. And so I think that's a great way to kind of learn a little bit about, what we could do to kind of work with you in that situation if you can't acquire that document. So thank you all again for being so patient and for sitting in on this presentation, and for those of you who stuck with it to the end. And I hope that you all have a great night. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. I'm always available. And I hope to see you all in person soon, the next time that I'm down in Mexico City. So thank you all again, and have a great rest of your night, and a great rest of your week.